The Enlightenment. All right, so this is a biggie. Things change permanently here. We are still, in my mind anyway, we're still part of the Enlightenment project. It's tough kind of understanding what was going on in this period because the way we think comes from the period right after this. It's called the Romantics. And so even today, if you see a clothing commercial and you're dressing to express your inner style, who you really are, or something like that, just the idea of who you really are and that it's important is a romantic idea. We're before that time period. And if you ever take a big literature survey or other type of survey, for when it's a 2, right, they're usually going to pick up with the Enlightenment, try to get through the Enlightenment very quickly, say if it was like a Brit Lit 2 or something like that. And then start talking about the Romantics, because today we tend to not have a deep affinity. We don't relate very well to the works in the Enlightenment. But I'm going to say this is more important, the Enlightenment. And the way I'm going to look at everything else for the rest of this chapter is that it emanates from, it's piggybacks on top of the Enlightenment. So we can only sort of picture ourselves as very important when things start functioning. And that's what starts happening here. It's not all at once. This is over a long time. Notice that I gave you 1660 before is the long Enlightenment, the long 18th century. They're making sort of the same distinction here. You could argue a little bit about these dates. So by and large, over this period, so not in one single year, the Enlightenment marks the divide between the medieval worldview, dominated by religion and the principles of religious faith, and the modern view is governed by science. Okay, so think of it more as an emphasis. So God doesn't go away, religion doesn't go away, but over time we're going to go more toward, in their minds anyway, the principles of science and reason. Some of this reasoning and some of this science is really flawed, but so the thought, how people think about things and how to proceed is moving in that direction. And so if you see in the future, so there's a famous picture of Adams. All right, Samuel Adams, the founding father, he's pointing to the Massachusetts Charter, but he's pointing down at it at the time. And so not up, as everybody does in the Middle Ages. Like, not pointing up to God anymore. We're pointing down. We made this. We wrote this. This is now how we are going to proceed this in his case, the Massachusetts Charter at the time, but the laws that put everything together. Well, how did this come into being? And really, it's an offshoot of the 30 Years' War. People got sick of fighting. And so now when people started taking a different direction, taking all of what we're now going to call Western Civ in a different direction, Western civilization. So the idea now is not to go with whatever prince, king, or so on you think has the best blood claim to the throne, is closest to God somehow through a blood lineage or something like that. We're going to tend to privilege people who know what they're doing over time. And after a while, after the revolutions anyway, we're going to privilege democracies, especially in America. America starts, the governmental parts of America anyway, in the Enlightenment period within contemporaries of this period, and steeped in Enlightenment thought. And then after America gets rolling, almost immediately transitions into, for the art anyway, into a romantic. So we're heavily romantic in art, but not in the institutions. Because you have to be like having the institutions of the Enlightenment before you get going. So they go through a period. We're about to go through a period that we didn't really have in America as far as the arts. Okay, scientists. So after people get sick of fighting, sort of over time, it's not that the scientists lead this. They're a product of all of this. So what we're trying to do is get to the effort to arrive at scientific truths by means of direct observation. What does that mean by scientific as opposed to what? As opposed to a revealed or a revelatory truth. Right, so scientific truth. So what do we mean by that? If something is God told you this was the case, you somehow arrived at, God pushed the understanding of it into you. It was revealed by God. So now they're saying things like, well, don't take my word for it. This is what I did. You can replicate the experiment. Right? That's what we mean by the empirical method. This is going to really profoundly change immediately, like the Black Death. They start treating things. This one, I forget this guy's name, but he was basically a country doctor in, I want to say England, but if one of you are curious, just go back through and track it down again, because I'm getting so old and I've been doing this so long, I forget the details sometimes. But it was this one doctor essentially said, I'm not going to treat with Galen's methods anymore, with the humors for the plague that's going through at the time. I'm going to have a test group that I do nothing, don't want to do anything to this one group, and I'm going to isolate them, and then this other group I'm going to use gay. Well, they called him inspired by Satan. It was unethical. It's this. But it turned out that the test group that he didn't do anything to had a greater survival rate, because at the time medicine was in such a bad shape that if you go in with a sniffle, like this time of year, everybody's a little congested with all the pollen in the air. Well, you get a doctor, get a hold of you, go, oh, good thing you came to me now. First thing we're going to start doing, we're going to bleed you. We're going to try to get these humors back. Oh, wait a minute, that didn't work. Now I'm going to give you these herbs, going to make you puke, give you all kinds of diarrhea. Now, and then the next thing you know, the doctor's got you on death's door inside of 3 or 4 days, right, by treating you at the time. Jonathan Swift used to just pulverize them. We'll get to Swift here in a little bit. But he was one that picked up back in the day, but a lot of people didn't. Okay, mathematical proofs. And how can we see into the development of new instruments? But just think about this more as the pursuit itself. Why do we, you have to think of the idea of getting to a microscope, and that it's important. Things that you see through a microscope are important and can help you. So eventually this is going to lead them into the doctors anyway, into germ theory. But there are all sorts of other instruments, right? Right today, physicists are up to, I don't even know what stage of where they collide particles together, and then the distinction is really blurry in ways that seem troubling between energy and matter, and how particles can seemingly jump around through time, and you can affect one and it'll affect the other one and the other side of the gap. But anyway, it's instruments that are helping them out with stuff like this. Okay, Copernicus. And so it's not that Copernicus came up with something entirely new. Some of the ancient thinkers were on to the idea that Copernicus sort of came up with. It's that now I'm thinking differently than before. We're getting way past the point to where people just stop looking at the Bible itself. We don't need to look in the Bible for everything. All the truths aren't there. Right, we can go out and observe that it really upset people at the time. Okay, so this is the specifics of the Copernican thought. Kepler is along the same vein. Aristotle always posited an unmoved mover, first cause. And I guess you could substitute the Big Bang for that, is what some people try to do. But it really, this new thinking more or less just upset people is what they're going through. Galileo, same thing. It wasn't that he just had a telescope. It's that he was really in people's kind of face at the time about this is the way to go about figuring out things. Empirical method again. So inductive reasoning. If all these things seem to be true, then we can get a general conclusion about it. And then deductive is the opposite of that. Descartes. So if you talk about the guy who got deductive reasoning going, I think, therefore I am. Or in Latin, cogito ergo sum. I think it's supposed to be sum. So I think, therefore I am. So if you've heard this expression before, you may not have caught it, but this is who it comes from. There's all sorts of flaws with all of that. We know that you're not that this does not necessarily true. So again, it's the idea of all this going. He came up with a whole philosophy starting out with that. Newton's synthesis. Okay, the intelligible universe had operated as systematically as a well-oiled machine. So this is, by the way, and for a while here, Newton was doing a lot of work, or people were adopting his thought anyway, but it was really melding or jiving with organized religion at the time, because Newton was thinking that everything like this, it was in a perfect circle. These principles are really from God. We know what's going on with them, and it wasn't until much later that, or after Newton anyway, that science started and religion started diverging into a separate sort of thing. Locke, philosopher, the tabula rasa. The mind is a blank slate. So we put the stuff there. Infants don't necessarily think anything. We could train them, put whatever we put there, that's what they're going to give back to us, essentially. I mean, that's been proven not to be true, but it was a popular idea at the time. This idea still has legs, like the idea of a social contract, and an agreement made between citizens in the formation of the state and the authorities. And whether or not it's implicit, I guess, or explicit, this is the agreement that you're in. Hobbes was another. This guy cracks me up. Hobbes does. At the time, he was very cynical. He'd say life is short, nasty, and brutish, and basically it's all about power. There you go. Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. I mean, just a bundle of joy, this one. But his thinking was really popular back in a time where if you tended to see the state as corrupt, and some of the stuff we're going to talk about here in a little while is corrupt, like slavery, for example, then Hobbes is going to be maybe someone you're going to get justification from, or to use for whatever your means are or ends are. All right, the social contract coming up. Okay, so here's what we're going to, Montesquieu and Jefferson. So Jefferson doesn't come up with all the stuff in the Declaration of the Independence in isolation. Jefferson is heavily read in all these European thinkers, but he seemed to really get a lot from Montesquieu. So the idea of a separation of powers is, and so when he's arguing with the other founding fathers about how to put together the government, so the executive, legislative, and judicial, right, all need to be separate. So it talks about the Declaration there. So it wasn't just that one, it was a whole bunch of them, is what they want to say with Jefferson. And not just Jefferson. Just about all the founding fathers they were not common people. Most of them were fairly wealthy people. And most of them had a high degree of what we would call today college or learning. Right? So these were not ordinary people, all of the founding fathers. So they're putting together the high thought of the time. So some of the people we just went over, but there's a whole lot more as well. All right, so this sticks, this idea here. Among European intellectuals, the belief in the reforming power of reason became the basis for a progressive view of history. Again, for the most part, right? And then we think about the logical extension of this now. If we are to proceed, if we're to challenge the thinking that held society together in the age we just came out of, we're reacting now against this idea that there is a hierarchy that goes to God. It's not necessarily a divine chain of being. We should think about what can we come up with. If we're challenging things like this, well, all of a sudden, well, then women should say, well, wait a minute. Why should we always be subordinate to men if if what we've been sold is a bill of goods, essentially, or it was at least an erroneous way to think about stuff. So if we're going to privilege reason, then we get to privilege reason too, not just you men. Right? So, and then of these figures, this is a particularly important woman here. So Mary Wollstonecraft, who, by the way, is the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. Her daughter marries Percy Shelley, the poet. And anyway, interesting story about Frankenstein. But before we get there, so she puts I call this the intellectual foundation. All right, so she is the first. So we've talked about a few women who have done important things, but in terms of putting away a systematic or a crafting together thought that now other women, other people in general, but other women especially, can read and then carry on forward. Right? So she does the important stuff. So I'll liken her to, I don't know if this analogy is apt, but remember before when I was talking about writing in general and passing down knowledge, symbolic thinking, and all of that. Well, now, if you're going to design a new iPhone, you don't need to harness lightning again and reinvent the transistor and microchips and nanochips or whatever we're up to right now for all that, because all that stuff's there, right? It's on the. But see, somebody had to do all this way back when to lay the foundation. Well, in terms of a different thinking about genders, right? She's doing that here, right? So very, very important woman. Kant, German philosopher, seems a little silly to most people. He was incredibly important, don't get me wrong, but he thought ethical conduct is based not on love but on reason, because we're essentially reasonable people. To me, that seems laughable, but I guess if you think people are ultimately reasonable at the end of the day, then Kant could be a good person for you. He's incredibly boring to read, I'll tell you that. Rousseau, Enlightenment rebel. This idea still has traction. It's not necessarily true, but I guess people want it to be true. Human beings may be good by nature. Human beings are good by nature, argued Rousseau. But ultimately they are corrupted by society and its institutions. And think now we're in Europe. Right, so all the machinery at this point that's going, the scandals, the lawyerly stuff, all that, it would be so much better if we were on a beach, an island, if I say an island that people never got to. And what he means is that white people never got to at the time. And so what they did was this idea of the noble savage. So people who had existed in nature, right, didn't have any of the cares or the worries that people that he knew did or that he did himself. Right? And so it's like saying, so as if, like, I mean, even, going back now, Paleolithic people killed each other. Right? Sometimes they got along. It's always two things, right? You're going to have your arm outstretched. Are you going to work with a different group, or are you're just going to combat them? You're going to do both at times. Right, but he was not thinking that. He was thinking that in nature, everybody would just be good. So we know that's not true, but that's what he thought. There's still a lot of movies that'll show up with this theme in it. Adam Smith, Economic Theory. If you're interested, you're going to be an economist, or you're just interested in finance or money, it might be worth a presentation to go back. Adam Smith. Economists have moved on quite a bit, but seminal thinker. Revolution. So what we mean here is Napoleon. So although they don't mention him by name just yet. So we're going to get to a dramatic revolution. We've had lots of revolutions all over the world. It's just this one was particularly well documented and dramatic. And so they're talking about France here. And say that throughout French history, taxes had fallen exclusively on the shoulders of the lower and middle classes, the so-called Third Estate. Think about this a second, almost 4/5 of the average person's income went to pay taxes. So 80%. Imagine if 80% of your check is getting kicked. This is so on this side of Napoleon, people loved it when Napoleon was rising because he was sticking it to these aristocrats. And so what the aristocrats had done here in France is what rich people have done everywhere, all over the world, throughout time. As the state progresses, they'll go in and try to write new laws, get favors, do this, do that, to where they get all of the marbles, right? And then something will happen, right? So maybe the state collapses, it gets into a war it can't win, or here, people just take over. And so while Napoleon is going to be the one who takes everything over, he's got the support of the people around him. Well, how did they get to this? Well, you all have already heard stuff like this. It's the king wanted to wage a new military campaign. I forget who had upset him at the time, but all this takes money. And so he goes to his nobles and they say, my God, we're already paying all the taxes. Well, they're not paying anywhere near 80% of the taxes, but see, they're paying most of the money. That's true because they have all of the money, right? It's a very common situation. And so in this case, it's all going to blow up in Napoleon. But so I want to point out here, Napoleon now in America has a bad name because he turned into a dictator. On this side of it, people loved him because he's sticking it to the man. And then later, after he gets power, he does what just about everyone who gets power that's unchecked. He becomes kind of corrupt. This is the literature I was talking about. No one likes to read Alexander Pope. Huge intellectual at the time. He wrote in these heroic couplets. He put the Iliad and the Odyssey into these. All right, cease then, nor order imperfection name. Our proper bliss depends on what we blame. So rhyme, different rhyme. And if you get further into it, which we're not here, there's sort of a part A, part B, C, D, and they can do all sorts of things with each other. So I guess what I want to say here is you can kind of, it's very orderly. This is what this age loves. And I'm going to point out here that we're not that far still. Alexander Pope is not that far from the period of the 30 Years' War. Right, so now it's like nobody in this age wants to fall back into the skirmishes again. So even their poetry, even the couplets, and this is why people like to skip over it, because we're not talking about me, right? I this and I feel this, and like Pope's not talking about any of that sort of stuff. But the Romantics are so in a period right after this. So this is the sort of the awful part of this. This is just commerce for them. All right, so what were they like? They're going to trade pretty much anything they can. But at the time, the sugar trade became so important. They needed, in their minds, labor for this. So they just went out and stole people. They made money off of them, and then they made money off sugar on the other side of that. And a lot of these, I don't remember if I pointed out the East India Company and some of the other, there were different batches of companies depending on where you were in the world. But capitalism and this expansionary nature of capitalism sometimes has done some awful, awful things. And so we still have it today. The idea that if you're just making money, you're kind of like the responsibility is to the shareholders. That you're like not necessarily, you have rules, regulations that people will say they don't like, but they do as soon as you pollute a lake or something like that. Well, this is far worse at the time, and only after passed laws, they're it's not going to stop, right? As long as they can make money off of it, essentially. All right, satire. Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels. I've mentioned before, just a scathing satirist of the era. It unfortunately it's probably not possible for you in this course to go back and do a presentation on Gulliver's Travels, but if you're so inclined, it would be worth doing, or at least maybe part of it. or something. By the way, in his, like y'all probably have read at one point, the essay where Jonathan Swift says, well, you need to go back and eat the Irish babies. That's what I'm advising here. If we do and so most of the essays talking about how you can fry Irish babies and you should bake them like that. He doesn't actually mean to do that. Like, he's being satirical. He's basically saying if you English are going to treat the Irish so poorly, then you might as well start eating their kids. But back when I used to teach this, and they used to show up in a lot of English composition textbooks, and I would open up with the students at the time. Well, this is why all Irish people are short, right? It's because of this, because they ate all the big Irish babies. And the student, they were going along like, no, I'm messing with you right now. They wouldn't do that because he's saying something else, not what he's writing here. He means something else. It's a satire, the opposite of this, right? All right, but we're kind of losing that, I think, our ability to pick up stuff like that in society. Voltaire, huge thinker. The Candide must tend to our garden at the end of the day, meaning like all this big talk that's led to war, we need to concentrate more on what's right in front of us and making the life, like the place around you, better. So if you ever hear someone sticking there, we got to tend to our garden. Okay, well, instead of all this big talk, what are small steps we can take today to improve the people, like our lives or the people we know around us? Hogarth was an engraver at the time. Painter. This was also satirical. So he's making fun of marriage here and there. He has a bunch of them like this. So this one's The Transaction, and there are some other ones you could look up. So here, these two young people are getting married. The dogs down here symbolize fidelity. One dog's not interested, much like he appears not to be interested. This creepy old guy is hitting on her. These two guys don't even notice because they've got some lawyers here that are going over the contract. And what's going on in here in the background? Somebody's building a new house, right? So probably this guy here. And so what he's doing, the whole thing is just a contract. There's no love at all. It's Hogarth's making fun of how the mercantile class at the time is rising. So let's say that this guy is the rising, the one with the money, but he doesn't have the name. This guy here has the name. So what they were doing, the classes at the time, the new money was marrying into old money, and old money didn't really have as much money, which is why they were marrying into new money at the time. But some of these, well, just like you see here, it's pretty biting satire. The Rococo stuff kind of cracks a lot of people off and up, and it's here. Think now we're past the time period where people are worrying about falling back into that 30-year war. So now what they're going to do is be silly, be gaudy, have fun, and we mean the aristocratic people here. So goodness. Right, and we're going to go down and talk about the swing. Here is a good example from the period to talk about, because like you got this guy here chaperoning her, I guess, out into taking her out on the swing, but unbeknownst to this guy, her lover here, her wannabe lover, or whatever you would like to call it, and does she know he's here? What seems like she sees him and she's trying to give him a little look, I guess, is the idea. It's scandalous, right? Or it's just silly, is the idea. A lot of people, a lot is written about things like this, or work such as that. And finally, I want to point out here, Marie Antoinette, so she's going to get killed, but before she gets killed, so even art here as she's trying to craft her image, right? I'm not the spoiled queen in the palace. I'm a mother, right? You can see it here, which is to say this is the long-standing function of art, Right? Even if you go back in the day, I don't remember if I talked about it a whole lot at the time, but we had a female pharaoh for a Hatshepsut. And as soon as the next guy took over, what he did was he put people out with chisels to carve her name out of existence, because everything they did was in rock back in the day. But why did you put all that stuff in rock in the first place? Because it fashions your image. And so that's been going on forever. So that's what she's trying to do here. Didn't work, but that's what she was trying to do. And so the new, neo just means new. So the new classicism, they mean the new Greco-Roman culture. And by the new, they mean the stuff that the parts of it that they liked about what they read about the Greeks and the Romans. They're not taking whole sections necessarily of what the Romans did or what the Greeks did. And as people look back, nothing can really measure up, right? And sometimes people think all sorts of screwy stuff about the past. And so in this period, as that we'll get into later on with Napoleon, I'll talk about how Napoleon went down and into Egypt again and sort of brought back ancient Egypt into the European imagination. And then they went nuts on about mummies and thinking that parts of mummies could cure you for whatever. And so then that set off a whole movement of charlatans trying to sell pieces of mummy to very rich people. It just nuts, the whole thing. Okay, you're already now familiar with the architecture and how we like buildings to look like this, going way back. Victory Arch. And going back to Thomas Jefferson with Monticello. This was his house. Thomas Jefferson, the architect, remember he designed the central part of UVA. I don't think we talked about his house before, though. And so he designed his house, and I'm sure he drove his poor wife crazy, but one of the things he would not stop doing is redesigning and expanding his house and working on it some more. It was just non-stop with him. But notice the front here, right? With the homage to this classical past that he was studying, the rotunda on top. Very reminiscent of Rome. And the Parthenon, remember? All right, and so you can see the similarities here where they're copying from Greece in this case. And then especially this stuff later. So while the silly stuff is going on as well, there's also this high moral instruction, right? So the painting is supposed to teach you about values and help to make you more virtuous. They took this idea seriously at the time. If you saw it, think about it, and you start becoming it. And this idea of the harems really fascinated Europeans. And we're going to come back to this because notice now, if you can remember the work we were talking about before that was kind of like this, it was about a marriage in that case. But now I just want to point out that it's not like a marriage. Now, this is a prostitute. So she's looking, well, are you our next, kind of looking at you, are you our next customer, or are you scandalous? This is now becoming a scandalous type of work. And we're going to pick this up and when we get to the so closer, not even really almost to the modern artist, but a little bit before, it'll start all making sense because they all sort of like picking up this same theme of the reclining woman. All right, music here. So we're going to compare, contrast Mozart and Beethoven. But before we get to that, I just want to point out, if you've never been to a symphony, you probably do want to go to a symphony. And it will be arranged in a certain pattern. And the pattern's basically going to be this. Low frequencies behind. All right, for the simple reason, people think, well, why on earth would you do that? Because you can't put the low frequencies up front. Because remember, the whole building is, the point is not to be mic'd up. and have speakers amplifying sound how they want to. This is supposed to all come out. Think of it as a wave coming out from the stage. And if you put the low stuff up front, the high stuff, you would never hear it correctly, right? It's not gonna mix together properly. And so much like, if you've never thought about this before, when people talk about putting subwoofers in your car, that like physically, generally, historically anyway, have got to be bigger, right? Because that's going to make the low frequency. Whereas the smaller stuff, higher frequencies, but not as powerful. There's not as much energy in the wave. And Mozart, very orderly. It wasn't playing a little bit ago. The Mozart. So, you know what? I might just make this an assignment, right? A little cast to go along with that as well. But the idea is going to be, it's obviously very orderly, and he's not trying to break the patterns necessarily that he establishes, whereas Beethoven did. Like he was trying to create that expectation. And so generally speaking, with Beethoven, we're going to get to next chapter, the idea is that you're gonna break free. It's just going to explode is the idea, the expectation. And that's very romantic for that one. So Mozart, classic, or Beethoven, romantic, or neoclassical, right? Japanese, remember the kind of Buddhism that went to Japan was the meditative form. So Soto and Rinzai, although the book doesn't go into all that. But what both of them had was the tea ceremony. And so the tea ceremony itself is kind of cool if you've never seen one of these. But they usually mean green tea, by the way. And it's the tea ceremony itself is very ritualistic. And in fact is a meditation in and of itself. So if you ever get a chance to witness or be a part of this, you want to take that. That'll be a good experience. And it's not heavily caffeinated by our standards, right? Coffee's got way more caffeine in it than the green teas that they're going to use, but they're not used to it either. Whereas a lot of you all are already used to your double sugar, triple bomb, whatever from Starbucks that's gonna like have your eyeballs popping by the time you get to class or work or wherever you're going. That's way past what these monks are used to, but they're used to not having any caffeine and then getting a little bit of a boost. All right, thank you guys for hanging in there.